Hey guys, so it's that time of the format again where we're making ban list predictions. So a couple of weeks ago, I did bring a ban list prediction survey result video, basically summarizing what the community thinks will happen. This time around, we're going to go over what I think will happen. So it's certainly open to discussion and hearing your thoughts. I do think that this ban list will probably come out after YCS Aneheim sometime in mid-December and then come into effect for January 1st, which is what we saw last year. And so maybe that's like a trend that we see continuing. So anyways, let's just get to the predictions. I kind of want to start with deck lockdown, to be honest with you, because this card can be so oppressive for decks that do play it. Granted, not every deck can play it, or rather won't really play optimally under it, so they don't. But you saw it on stream, for example, and when you can play it, it's essentially like an auto win button, really. Most commonly, you do see Centurion play this. That's the one I see most commonly played. In terms of just the fact that it prevents them from adding, like that alone is strong enough. And if that was the only effect, I think it would still survive. But the fact that it also prevents people from specialing from the deck, I think that's just really, really strong. You could argue for it to be limited. Obviously, Konami has gone towards, limiting floodgates nowadays, but they did ban summon limit, and that alone also was crazy good and oppressive. So I think I wouldn't be, hopefully, this does happen in terms of forbidden, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it gets limited. I put Abyss Dweller in here because I did mention about how this list would come after YCS Aneheim, and Ryzeal is going to be like rank 4 turbo, and you're going to see a lot of like Bagooska, Abyss Dweller. I probably should have put Bagooska in here as well, but at the same time I think it would be far too early for something like that to happen, so I just would put it on no change, I guess, for Bagooska at least. Now that SP is available compared to, let's say, tier 0 format, when you saw a lot of Bagooska and you didn't have SP and you had to play something like, let's say, like Nightmare Cerberus, or like even like, I don't know, maybe Azalea, like it wasn't as optimal. Whereas with Abyss Dweller, it's a little bit too crazy and probably a little bit hard to stop as well. Some other floodgates. Okay, Anti-Spell and Skill Drain. Both of them, I do think, they are ban-worthy for sure. At the same time, and also you could argue, they are definitely seeing more play in terms of like generic among all decks. Compared to something like Deck Lockdown. But I think there are still some workarounds to Anti-Spell and Skill Drain. More so for Skill Drain, there's some other interactions you can do to get around with it compared to like Anti-Spell. But at the same time, I would hope they would get banned. But I'm a little hesitant to put too many cards on the forbidden section, just because Konami tends to like ban like 4 to 5 cards at a time. So that's the only reason I would not put it, in terms of like trying to be realistic. I also want to talk about like the Kashtira stuff. So right now, I think the popular thing to do is, people are saying like, ban Unicorn or limit Unicorn. I don't think limiting Unicorn does really much, because if you look at the ratios of decks that are playing Kashtira stuff as a package, then they're playing 2 Unicorns, 3 Fenrir, and 3 Wraithoth. So if you limit Unicorn, then you would probably have to limit like Wraithoth as well. But at that point, I think originally, I was actually going to suggest, or rather think, that Birth would be the one that would get banned, just because this, gives that free body. Also, when you have Birth, it kind of puts your opponent in like a checkmate position, right? Because if you like banish or pop the Unicorn, you can always bring it back with Birth. If you bounce it, obviously you can just summon it again. And if you ban Birth, then at least with like pure Kashtira decks, yes, I get it, they do play 3 Birth instead of 1 Birth. That was also in the ratio for decks that play Kashtira as an engine. But at the same time, at least pure Kashtira can still play Theosis to summon out another body, whereas decks that play Kashtira as an engine, they're not going to play Theosis, right? Because it does lock them into only Xyz summons. So that's why I had proposed maybe Birth would be the one to get banned. But I think I've been sort of convinced by other people now that Unicorn, the extra deck rip, can be a little bit toxic. If it was only, let's say, like once in a duel, then sure. But because if you hand trap your opponent on their turn, you get 1 card ripped, and then when you start out your turn, you're probably activating a monster effect against spell, and you get another one ripped. So you know what? I have been sort of convinced that this would be the one to get banned. Obviously, pure Kashtira on its own is not something super crazy right now at all. It's just like Rogue, but as an engine, I think it's just become really, really popular, especially as a YCS Bologna, that maybe something does get addressed. Bonfire, I think, would get limited. This happened in the OCG. I don't think it's too unreasonable, especially this coming after now a reprint in the quarter century, whatever, Bonanza set. And this is, for the most part, like Snake Eye, Fire King, that sort of deck. But you know what? It does help some other decks too, including Ryzeal, which is coming, and this will at least be just after Ryzeal has entered the mix. Some boring ones, it's something like Change of Heart. No one's playing this card, like sure, just put it to 2 and then eventually 3. I don't think anyone would care. In terms of some other cards that can come off, like let's say Colossus, it got put to 2, didn't really do anything. Even like let's say Ritual Beast, which has actually been doing pretty well as of the most recent YCS Bologna event. But even then, I don't even think they are that common in terms of playing this. Like I think they're more so prioritizing protos, which should be banned. But realistically, again, I don't think there's going to be any change for that either. I think especially with like the new Moltrami coming, I'm not sure if people would really play that. Maybe they do because of like Malice, for example, in like January. I think that's when the card's coming out. And Ritual Beast kind of get screwed by all three Moltramis, although so far they're actually still getting a decent amount of YCS tops. Tenpai is a little weird. You know, I don't like Tenpai like most people out there, but at the same time, it's a little hard to hit this deck, I find, directly at least, just because you have like such few cards in Tenpai, right? They don't have that many in-engine cards, so I think maybe you could do something like Semi-Limit Chandra. I mean, some people I know, I've seen a lot of people put this at 1. Maybe. I mean, I would love to see that, but I think they would do like a little bit of hits. It's kind of like how you saw like Pure Cashier that they got hit and they just put like Unicorn to 2, for example. They did bring it back pretty quickly though. Although some indirect hits, for example, Prosperity, I think this card should be banned. Limiting it was a nice start. Finally, it took them way too long to do it, but they should definitely ban this card. And this will also be an indirect hit to Tenpai as well, although, you know, again, it's at 1, so maybe it's not as reliable anyways to begin with. Crossout, I would have thought would have been hit to like 1 or 2 by now, but if it didn't get hit during Tier 0 Snake Eye format, I'm not sure if it would. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of, you know, tier, like the best decks being able to play through handcrafts better than they already can. At the same time, I think for now, maybe we don't see any change. And unfortunately, with some of the thrust targets like D-Barrier, which I think will be pretty popular, again, with this new format, crossover breakers, you know, for example, calling Xyz on Ryziel, and perhaps Konami feels that, at least for the time being, we need some kind of unnecessary, or necessary evil rather, in something like D-Barrier, and same thing can be said for something like different Dimension Ground and Dimension Shifter. Unfortunately, as much as I want this card banned, you know, heading into this new format with something like Malice where they want their stuff to get banished, and if anything, people are probably going to play siding Lancia, which we haven't seen in a while in terms of at least dominantly, like most people playing Lancia in the side. That's been maybe like Dino tier 1 format in like early days of the pandemic. So Shifter should go, but I don't think we're going to see main deck Shifter play much anymore just because of something like Malice. So at least that's kind of a nice direction. You know what? Speaking of Ryzel, who can just pop multiple times, like not once per turn, then why can't Dryden come back? I know Konami brought it back once and they had to ban it again. I'm sure they don't want to repeat mistakes, but this time, you know, it's just really not that big of a deal. This can definitely come back. And speaking of, I actually think this can come back as well. So originally when this card first got banned, I remember specifically saying that, okay, you know, in the future when like the Adventure Engine stuff gets hit, then this card can definitely come back, because at the time that made it really, really strong. But nowadays, you know, Adventure Engine is hardly seeing any play. It's just like 8 to 9 cards depending on the ratios you play. It's a big package and just not really efficient in nowadays game, right? And also in terms of prank kits, what made this card so good was, you know, enabling those crazy 1-card combos, but at the same time we have so many crazier 1-card combos available in the modern game, so it's not that off anyways. And not to say that I don't want to encourage more 1-card combos, but I mean, you know what, it already exists. Fiendsmith, kind of similar to, let's say, like Cashier stuff, where it's seeing a lot of play as a package. If it wasn't kind of that new, and also as a secret rare in a set, I would have definitely put this also maybe like limit, semi-limit, or probably limit. I mean, some decks, a lot of decks actually just play it at 2 anyways. But I think for now it would be no change. But in terms of like the concept of something like Cashier Engine, it would fall there. It's just only because it's relatively new, but also as like a secret chase card in Infinite Forbidden. Flamberge finally, hopefully, gets banned. This should have been banned to begin with, and I think we're just doing some hits. I mean, I should have clarified that because Ryziel and Malice are coming into the mix, you know, that alone is also going to change up the format quite a lot, right? Even without a balance, it's kind of like with Power of the Elements, you know, Sprite tier elements coming into the mix, where Branded and Sword Soul were tier 1, and then just those 2 new decks entering into the mix without a balance completely change the format on its own. So that's why I feel maybe that alone would be enough, but Flamberge should still definitely go away. Heavy Storm, I believe this is limited in the OCG, and I think it can definitely come back someday, but maybe for now, it's just not a change, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does come to 1. Kieran, in my balance prediction survey, a lot of people thought this would go to 1. And you know what? Sure, maybe, you know, it allows for like that imperm dodging, but I don't think that they would maybe do so many direct hits, just again with Malice and Ryziel coming into the mix. That alone should be enough to maybe mix things up in the format. So I'll put this here, but at the same time, something like more generic card like Witch, for example, which is typically being played in 3 now. Maybe this is the one that they can hit now to 1. And then other things, okay, I should have also put Pankratops earlier, but this is a card that, no one's really playing it. Maybe when it came back to two rather, some people were playing on the side. I've been kind of like breaking down top cut deck lists, but really hardly do you see this in even side deck play now. Magma, I actually think this card will get banned. This is really sacky. Like if you have it, then it's essentially you have to prepare for like double DD Crow really subsequent. And so this card is going to see play in like, let's say Malice, not really in terms of like interruption against the opponent, more so to like enable their own combos. This is technically an indirect hit to Centurion as well, because they've been essentially going towards a more bestial route with like the regain and stuff that really works well with them, and having like their Axiela being dragon. But this card is just really strong, and I think finally time for it to go. And Phantom Rebel lastly, so I know a lot of people will be putting this at 1, and if you had asked me maybe just when Rage of the Abyss came out, sure, I would agree. But now, if you actually look at all the tops post Rage of the Abyss, Yubel has been struggling quite a bit in terms of overall representation of tops. And sure, it's an incredibly bonkers card, essentially like a Link 0 monster negate that can enable combos. But I think for now, especially with like some new decks coming into the mix, I don't think there would be a change on this card, again, because there's not seeing that much top cut representation. Anyways, guys, that was my ramble in terms of my ban list predictions. Really looking forward to what you guys have in mind in terms of what will happen. Obviously, we all have our opinions. We're all going to be probably pretty wrong once the list actually comes out. But I really do look forward to your comments and see what can happen to make this format a little bit better. But anyways, big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons and sponsors as always for the continued support, and well, take care, guys.